the player who will save your season is that and more this week on the couch. The return, always happy, joyous return of Bob Harris. Tell him, Bob, who's going to save their season.
All is lost. Nobody's coming to help you. You're doomed. No, we know for a fact that every year, I mean, I can go back and read you the list if you'd like, but every year somebody comes out of nowhere to win you a fantasy title. I mean, if we're going to like go ahead and throw our, plant our flag right now, I'm prepared. So like, I often like to go back to my roots and I lean heavily on the great, philosophers at Sesame Street, and I go with their brilliant theory. One of these things is not like the other. Those things that are not like the other are the things that stand out to me. Right now in Baltimore, there's one thing that's not like the other, right? His name is Keaton Mitchell. So like it's easy to feel like you're bandwagoning on it. Wow, he's had a couple great games. But this goes back, and I'm going to go ahead and throw out some credit to my friend Billy Musio over at Player Profiler, who started talking this guy up, I want to say, the last week of August. And said, you got to watch this guy. By the end of the season, he's going to be it, right? And so I kind of kept an eye on this guy and I see what he's saying. Look, I get it. There's not a lot of evidence here, people. I'm using a very narrow band of productivity, but also, throwing in that one of these things is not like the other. Look, he is not going to be mistaken for Gus Edwards. And that's a good thing, right? And hopefully he scores as many touchdowns. Hopefully he catches all the ones they throw to him too. Young man, get on point. But like it's been a very, very narrow band of workload. I think this is probably because he's coming off hamstring issues. They're working his way up. I feel like he will easily surpass Justice Hill if he is not already, right? Like Justice Hill's playing time the last couple of weeks has come at times when it really didn't matter. And Mitchell was in the game when it mattered. So here's the argument. Well, I don't know if he's going to get enough work. I made that same argument probably about Devon Achane at one point this season, right? And I'm not saying that Keaton Mitchell is Devon Achane, but he's kind of like that, right? Like, look, Matt Waldman will tell you that Jaleel McLaughlin is closer to Devon Achane. And he's a similar piece, right? But I think his role is going to be not as robust as what Keaton Mitchell is going to end up getting. And maybe it's going to be a limited role all along because he is not a big man, 190-ish pounds. And maybe it doesn't look like he's built quite to take the amount of punishment that Achane is. But not far from it. And I don't know that he has to take all that punishment. They got Gus Edwards to take all the punishment. And if they can use some things some of the approaches that we've seen them use the last 2 weeks to get him the ball in space, more power to them and more power to me as someone who invested heavily in one Keaton Mitchell a few weeks back.
Yeah, I think I felt like when he had that game, the 138 yards, that was the train at the waiver wire station. And I said, if you have the first priority or you've been sitting on the biggest bank now for a few weeks and you have the hammer, this is maybe the best player, the best candidate. And some of it, what's great about Keaton Mitchell as a candidate, Bob, is the football gods, the fantasy football gods, they're trying to make it obvious if it is him.
Right.
With the big plays, right? I mean, it's right there. It's just that simple. And John Harbaugh saying we have to get him more work. And like you said, you brought up Devon Achane. And I think the important thing to emphasize, right? Because I like to say, what if we can play this with another set of players later today? Like, what if Tyjae Spears was drafted in Miami, and Achane was drafted in Tennessee? Would we be talking about Tyjae Spears as a player, like breakout player of the year, even though he's getting 12 or 15 touches a game? So the situation matters. And Baltimore, I've been fascinated with Keaton Mitchell ever since he made the team, Bob, because you are defending now a little more, at least the deep pass with Zay Flowers and Odell Beckham looking like old Odell Beckham and Rashad Bateman starting to show signs of life. You're defending the middle of the field pass, Mark Andrews. And then, like you said, Gus Edwards, you don't want to have a light box against Gus Edwards. And with Lamar Jackson playing 11-on-11 football, you can't have a light box anyway. So Keaton Mitchell is going to find some lanes, just like he has, and Devon Achane has. I've got some other candidates and other players to talk about, but what I like about both you and I presenting Keaton Mitchell is we're telling a story, right? There's a story. Keaton Mitchell would be obvious in hindsight, right? I want to put out one just because Keaton Mitchell was free a few weeks ago. He's not free now,
right?
Okay, you could buy high. You could still try to trade for him. And again, if
I have a bunch of him, come see me.
Yeah. And I mean, you could probably make a reasonable, you might, if you have Devin Singletary and you think Keaton Mitchell, you might be able to swap those guys. Devin Singletary obviously belongs in this conversation. Devin Singletary often peaks. He has that extra kick down the stretch too. He has had it for Buffalo. He's been a December player. Devin Singletary belongs in this conversation. I want to toss out one more obvious one. It's so obvious, like it's sitting right there. And this guy is free. Okay. Devin Singletary was free a week ago. He's not free now. 2-3 weeks ago, Keaton Mitchell was free, not now. I bet you Jerick McKinnon is free on the waiver wire, Bob.
We see how he operates, right? I mean, we remember last year where down the stretch, he was running back, 8 touchdowns over the last 6 games of the NFL season. And this was not a new development because it happened similarly, not as robust a performance the year before as when we saw him start to appear as well. And so with the offense taking a bit of a hit, I mean, it's not going great guns right now. The defense is the thing that's pulling them through. They need a little more offense. I'm guessing he's not on my list because look, I drafted the hell out of Jerick McKinnon because he was a 10th, 11th round pick, but I drafted him for this reason. There are players you draft that, you don't draft unless you have deep rosters, right? If you're going to be churning your roster, don't draft Jerick McKinnon. For that matter, on those same teams, I should not have drafted Jahmyr Gibbs, right? Like you weren't going to get anything. I thought I would, but if you're not going to get anything, or Dalton Kincaid, maybe a better example, right? Where you thought it would take a little while for him to get up to speed. So I think Jerick McKinnon is a similar kind of player, but this would be history repeating itself. I'm not overly enthusiastic about getting last year's numbers because those touchdowns are, volatile numbers, but they're possible.
Well, whoever it is, if you're out there listening right now, look at the last player on your bench. Do they have a chance to be your league winner? I don't care who it is. I don't care. I know without looking at your roster, if you're listening right now, that Jerick McKinnon should be on your roster instead of the last guy on your roster. Whoever it is. I don't care who it is. Don't carry a backup quarterback if that's what it takes. I mean, make sure in dynasty leagues, throw one of those 4th, 5th round pick offers, and the reason he's fascinating, other than just the hit you over the head history repeating itself, and isn't history repeating itself in Kansas City's offense already this year? Isn't it already happening? I mean, have we seen, other than Isaiah Pacheco's already arrived, it's the same issues. And like you said, Patrick Mahomes not peaking right now. Maybe it was just he was sick or something.
Maybe.
But it's trust, right? What happened down the stretch? Trust. And speaking of the stretch, for the horse racing fans out there, Bob, I think I was 8 or 9 when I learned how to read a racing form. This is like one of those horse races where as they come and turn on the stretch in the AFC, there's 11 horses. It's compete. And Kansas City can break out of the pack as they always do by taking care of business. Yep. And I feel like Patrick Mahomes, more than any other quarterback, is authoring the game himself. It's not so much based on the structure of the offense, right? It's Patrick Mahomes and how Patrick Mahomes is vibing with the game of football that afternoon. And it just makes sense that in the games that matter the most, in the situations that matter the most in those games, if Jerick McKinnon was coming through for him last year, Jerick McKinnon, who's still on the roster, would be a guy he's going to look for in those situations again this year.
Right. So we've had this discussion before. The Kansas City Chiefs decided when Tyreek Hill went away, or they let him move on, that they're paying $500 million for their quarterback, not their receivers. And that their quarterback was going to create their receiving room or turn their receiving room into more than it is. He was going to spin that straw into gold. Well, it's been a bit of a struggle. So expecting him to go back to a piece that he has turned into gold in the past makes perfect sense. And as you said, it's winning time. Time to get down to business.
Yeah, so I like that one. You mentioned Jahmyr Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs is a great candidate.
Yes.
I mean, they're showing us, again, last week against the Chargers, just the Detroit offense. There's not any surprises coming. It's Laporta and Saber. Maybe Jared Goff. Maybe the actual answer would be Jared Goff. It all converges at Jared Goff. And something I've mentioned so many times that people are already sick of hearing me say it probably.
I haven't heard it. Say it to me.
They have one outdoor game between now and week 17. That's it. And it's at Chicago.
Right. And I'm not saying he's blowing up the home road narrative, but the last 2 road games he's blown up
as long as it's indoors.
Right.
Right.
Or even in Tampa Bay, it wasn't indoors.
Yeah, that's true. It
was nice out though.
Yeah. I think New Orleans' only outdoor game between now and week 17 is in Tampa Bay, although New Orleans' offense is a mess. Maybe it's Taysom Hill. Maybe they come out of the bye and Taysom Hill's getting 20 snaps a game at quarterback. I mean, the offense certainly looks like it's the most functional or the most exciting or
I don't-
dangerous when
I
Taysom's
don't
out
know.
there?
Like I feel like our expectations are too. I thought it was like pretty functional with Derek Carr the 4 games leading up
For a
to
little
this
bit, yeah.
game, right? I mean, it had
But
been
that
going up.
coincided with Taysom Hill playing a larger role and doing his thing too.
I don't disagree with that, but I think like 75% of my perception of New Orleans offense is Derek Carr yelling at people and making sour
You're right.
faces. And so you feel like, wow, but things must be going horribly, right? And then you look at the numbers and like, wow, he was yelling at Chris Olave, but look what he's done all season. Holy smokes.
Sure. And maybe some better execution.
Yes.
But they have the elements, even with Michael Thomas out for probably a while. A.T. Perry is interesting. A.T. Perry, not a season saver, but somebody who could end up mattering in fantasy leagues.
I think there are like a handful of receivers that look like, if you're making speculative plays right now, and maybe not even speculative, like Michael Wilson, 20% target share with Kyler Murray this week, a guy who's he's in the top 5, I want to say, in yards per catch already. Great blocker, so he's an asset to have on the field, a great blocker in the run game. Jalen Tolbert seems to be, building a little momentum, and I know Michael Gallup had the big plays last week, but who was on the field more? It was a little total. Look, they're blowouts, so you're trying to wait for a little better idea. But I think players like that, I'm kind of and I think that's again, look at the end of your bench, last guy on your bench, and do the test.
Yeah, well, and what I like about those ones that you brought up is you're attached to a good quarterback.
Right.
Like Dak Prescott, there's no hotter fantasy quarterback right now. And like you said, Tolbert, even though Brandon Cooks, it looked like he came on with that week last week. But before that, you really saw Tolbert with all the momentum of everybody not named CD Lamb.
Yep.
And then with Wilson, Kyler Murray, and what's nice about fantasy football in a way concealing this is you might look at Kyler Murray's bottom line fantasy output last week. What was it, like 18 points or something, even though he scored a rushing touchdown, disappointing, I suppose. But if you watched Kyler Murray, you saw, oh, hey, it's Kyler Murray. Awesome. This is going to be fun. He's one of the most fun quarterbacks to watch, and he's able to be himself. He's comfortable right off the bat doing all the things that made Kyler Murray. Go ahead.
I just thought it was, I still was playing him in leagues where I had him because I had guys on bye or whatever. I thought I ranked him like right about quarterback 12, and he delivered right about quarterback 12 numbers. But I think the thing that the mystery there was like he's played in an air raid offense since he was a small child, or at least in high school. He's still not that big, but I guess that, like, okay, Drew Petzing's offense is a little different creature. I mean, I think it's creative though and interesting, and Kyler Murray's obviously been around and working, and studying and knowing all these things. So I thought he executed it really well, and I think there's room for growth.
Yes. And that's what you're bringing up too, something I've said more than once, really watching Joshua Dobbs, and we'll come back to him, how the Arizona offense was functional. It was at least functional with Joshua Dobbs. And some of that is we were underestimating Dobbs, or maybe Dobbs was just becoming. We weren't underestimating him. What he was going into the season. Well, I don't even know if he knew he was going to become what he has become.
Well, let's stop right here. Right here and do this.
Yeah.
Like, what does it matter with the people who run a league who can't seem to find enough quarterbacks to run their league effectively, that they keep missing out on this guy who, like, last year, 8 days notice, he shows up in Tennessee and becomes a starter over a guy that was highly drafted to be the starter, and acquits himself reasonably well. Then he shows up in Arizona 17 days before the start of the season, ends up starting half the season, acquits himself reasonably well, shows up in Minnesota, and in 5 days later, he's running an offense and acquits himself pretty damn well, better than a number of other players who have been with their teams all along. Why are we missing on this guy? What don't people see? I mean, I know it's like maybe not the huge arm or some things, but like when you have a quarterback with this level of intellect, a guy who's capable of thinking on his feet, a guy with this level of mobility, maybe that's all he is a guy who can come in and save your ass on moment's notice. But I wonder if there's just not more there. And I wonder if there is, why more people haven't seen it up to this point.
Yeah. It's so wild how intertwined. Well, the Steelers kind of saw it, right? The Steelers were the ones that drafted him and developed him. A long line of failed mid-round picks as a Steelers fan. It's littered with names, T. Martin and so many names. But when he does, like you say, I mean, Bob, in some ways, throws into question some of our basic assumptions about professional football, right?
Right.
That someone can just walk. Seriously, that someone can just join an organization, admittedly
Like the
not
most
even know
important position in all the
right.
world of sports.
Everything in the offense is intertwined with the quarterback play. I mean, we see it, right? I was looking at the top 10 projected for the draft right now, and if that's not evidence that quarterback wins is real, we don't even have that debate anymore. But quarterback wins is real in so much that they have the most influence over the outcome of the game of any other position. And the teams that are having trouble at quarterback are the teams that are having trouble winning, with some exceptions, but enough that it is definitely a real thing. And Joshua Dobbs has Minnesota winning, but he comes in, like you said, because I mean, what are coaches going to tell us, Bob? Coaches are going to tell us that they're the important part.
Right.
It's the schemes. It's drilling these plays into you so many times that it's just like second nature to be an extension of the coach being on the chessboard, and you're the chess pieces. And Joshua Dobbs comes in like, oh, that play to that. Football has enough across the lexicon of different offenses. So this is like this offense, but with this flipped, or this terminology is different. But something about him, the players really respond to him, and he's a potential season saver. Absolutely, he's a potential season saver. He's had 2 massive games in a row. He's in a good offense,
and he's getting a big piece back.
But Justin Jefferson, yeah.
And also, his running backs are diminished to the point where maybe he has to run more. Look, that's a big part of his game has been his rushing ability, and I will acknowledge that in Arizona, it didn't. He seemed to decline a bit as we went on. Sure. Maybe as people figured him out. And maybe part of that is the lightning in a bottle portion of this. Like, hey, this guy just shows up and he's kicking our ass. There's nothing we can do about it until we figure it out. And that takes a few games in, and we'll see. But I'm like if you're sitting there and you're in desperation mode at quarterback, he's on the short list, people.
Yeah. And he's probably someone's second quarterback. So yep. You can probably, and he's been an elite fantasy quarterback the last 2 weeks. After you can't create details like this, Bob. He's living in a hotel,
doesn't know anybody's name.
And these are real things. And that's the thing that is really fun about this, and what keeps me coming back, and how doing this for as long as I have, not as long as you, Bob, but how it doesn't get stale, right? There are moments you wonder, is it going to get stale? Is it getting stale? It kind of feels like it's getting stale. And then a player like Joshua Dobbs and CJ Stroud also qualifies.
Absolutely, right? And it's like, you said something earlier about telling ourselves stories. I love telling myself happy stories. I mean, that's how I view my job. At least what I do to myself. I mean, every player I draft is somebody I've told myself a happy story about. Yes. Like in the back of my mind, I realize there's an equally unhappy story out there waiting to unfold. But that's how we operate as fantasy football managers. We sit there, we study the information, we take all the data in, we look at all the number crunchers out there throwing out the numbers, and we divine all these things, and we tell ourselves a happy story about a player. And so I think you can tell yourself a pretty happy story about Josh Dobbs if you're having issues at quarterback. There's a number of quarterbacks right now who are playing better than we expected, and a handful who are playing not as well. And so I think Josh Dobbs gives you maybe some tough weekly decisions if you're a Trevor Lawrence investor right now, right? Or a handful of other players, right? You're sitting there going, well, I don't know. There's a lot of players that we've told. So this is the downside of telling yourself happy stories, right? Is you have to be willing to divorce yourself from the narrative. The better fantasy players are the people who are quicker to divorce themselves from their happy narrative and go with oh no, it's all falling apart. I need to shift and do something different. That doesn't mean your happy story isn't going to come true, said Jahmyr Gibbs the last 2 weeks, right? Like I told myself a very happy story about him coming into the season. But and part of that story was like, okay, if Bijan Robinson is the best thing since sliced bread because Falcons drafted him with the 8th pick overall, then what the hell is Jahmyr Gibbs going at 12? What's the difference? And it turns out there's not much, right? Not much difference at all. Maybe we overinvested in both of them. I think the people who grabbed Bijan maybe feel like they did. Although I would say when you look at the numbers, just in general, I think it's just been a matter of expectations more than a matter of his delivery. And Arthur Smith. Both those things have combined to conspire against Bijan and leave a bad taste in our mouth. But maybe Arthur Smith's the story he's been telling us is true. I've been saving him for down the stretch. Like now that it's time to keep your job, Arthur Smith, you might want to consider unsaving him.
Right.
But this is what happens with players, and it's a good reminder that the NFL views things differently than we do. And we should have learned this 1,000 years ago. I mean, the number of examples I have, I can remember, who was the Miami running back? Lamar Miller, Lamar Smith.
Mm-hmm.
that we always thought, well, why don't they just give him more carries? Why doesn't Joe Philbin give this guy more carries? Right. Well, it turns out they're around this player every day, all day. They understand the limitations maybe a little better than we do. And we see one big play and we think, what the hell? Right. Well, there's more to the game than that. And they see all the pieces and all the facets. And sometimes it's a little more of a process than we'd like it to be.
Yeah, Tony Pollard, right? Except there's no excuse. Lamar Miller he went to a different team. He went to Houston. But Tony Pollard, it's the same team that said we should just give him 12 or 15 touches a game. It's
maybe they were explosive.
Right. They were, and Ezekiel Elliott looks as good as he did last year. They could have just kept Zeke, and this offense. It's good. It's funny to say the Cowboys' offense could be better, but at the very least, it could be better for us in fantasy football at the running back position.
Yeah, I keep thinking back because it's one of my old high school rivals, Skip Pete, who uttered those words. The running backs coach of the Cowboys, formerly the quarterback of the Saguaro Cougars, who eluded my grip many, many times as the Savino Sabercat. But he, he just, the way he laid it out was like, it's not like the workload, it's the number of snaps. We feel like he's just a better player if we don't ask him to do so much. And here comes Mike McCarthy, and I'm going to ask him to do too much, and you guys can all go to heck. Or wherever you go with the double hockey sticks. And so now, and it makes me wonder if Rico Dowdle isn't somebody you want to have on your roster.
Yep. Well, and again, I think that if we're asking about season savers, we're asking about, it's going to continue to change. It's going to continue to reveal things that are totally unexpected or absurd. I've cited Josh Dobbs more than once, Bob, to say that we have to embrace that things that we would dismiss as absurd are going to happen. Things that if someone presented it to you, you would say, that's impossible. Joshua Dobbs is going to show up in Arizona and actually be competitive. And then in the middle of the season, when Minnesota loses Kirk Cousins, he's going to go over there and he's actually going to make them a winning team and make fantasy football teams winning teams. Sure.
I get asked 1,000 times a season. Like the question will begin with, what did surprise you with? And as soon as those words come out, whatever the rest of the question is, I've already got an answer. No, it would not surprise me if.
You've watched it for long enough. You've watched the game for long enough. Yeah. So, but the stories, a couple of things. Well, the Bijan Robinson one is interesting because Arthur Smith, there could be like the natural trajectory of Bijan Robinson, but Arthur Smith is going to grab the steering wheel and he's going to make it his story. And he was saying earlier this year that he was hinting that Bijan Robinson, he was going to lighten up his load a little bit. Like he'd taken on a lot of work. And then what was funny was right at the point that he felt most inclined to defend his usage or lack of usage, the way he deployed his backs, is when he finally turned back to Bijan Robinson. In Detroit offense, Dallas offense, you're looking for the season saver. You're looking for the big second half play. Being attached to a really good offense, that helps. But the happy stories I want to get back to really quick. I always come back to Joseph Campbell. I could tell a lot of stories about how Joseph Campbell has figured into my life in a kind of eerie way. But Joseph Campbell or Carl Jung, I mean, we're on the couch here, or something that I would boil down to, oversimplify and say that there's a way that you can tell a story of this thing that we're in here, Bob, that it is made up of stories. Like that's what the actual building block of this is. And all of these outcomes that we're watching, these waves we're trying to catch and surf or not get pulled into the undertow by in a football season, all do kind of adhere to a rule of how like certain players' stories are going to go, whether it's struggle or whether it's overcoming. And we're peeking through keyholes, so we don't have anywhere near perfect information. And you mentioned Jahmyr Gibbs. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs is one where maybe the conditions weren't right yet. So you don't necessarily say it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen with the conditions the way they are right now. Right? But it changes.
So as a fantasy analyst, I've learned the value of saying, well, I'm not wrong yet.
Well, you could be right and wrong I've said this so many times, you could be right and wrong during the same season.
Right.
Like you can have the exact thing you predict to happen is going to happen, and then something's going to change, and then the thing that you said, well, this could also make me look very wrong. That could it's that sensitive. It's that sensitive to the environment, but it's also why you have to just keep your brain limber. I think the best thing you said, Bob, is you said nothing should surprise you. Right. That's the sign that your mind is in the right state to play fantasy football.
And by the way, people, if you're out there listening, the difference between me and Bloom is now apparent. He is speaking of things Jungian, and I'm going with the Sesame Street approach, right? So keep that in mind here.
There are connections there.
Right there. But so it is true. Like, like especially this year, it's really come, like it's every year. But I think we say it every year, like just like every year. Well, more guys are hurt than ever before. Well, probably not. But this year, the volatility of the NFL, the success they're having in creating exactly what they want, every game close, parity across the board, surprising outcomes, unexpected outcomes. That level of volatility has added a layer of difficulty, just like, to fantasy football. And we need to, I'm trying to, as I sit here and go through a season and go through all these same struggles that everyone else is going through and being half right and half wrong, and some weeks righter, and some weeks everything I expected to happen comes true, and other weeks everything falls flat on its face. I'm trying to I try to sit back and think bigger picture. How can I work around these things? What are the keys to navigating the volatility and the tricky issues? And the key is simple, right? It's not Sesame Street simple, but it's pretty simple. It's volume, right? Play volume when you can. Now, identifying the volume is where it gets tricky, right? That's where the problems are. But there are certain players where you're going to get a clear path to workload. And like, we're playing a game of probabilities, and it's pretty easy to follow the logic here. The more times a player has the ball in his hands, the more likely something good is going to happen, right? For you as a fantasy manager. So that's, to me, that's going to be the key going forward, is find players. And I think more and more, and we've learned this more and more, is, receiving assets are going to give you that more, the higher end receiving assets are going to give you that certain volume, at least in terms of fantasy production that you're looking for. In the running backs in an NFL where they are increasingly using split backfields and dividing up the workloads. And, we're just going to have to cobble that together as best we can. And it may be a week to week thing. And so, also believe some of the things like Jerome Ford's a prime example. I've had a little bit of a blind spot to him, but people got really nervous. Kareem Hunt showed up. Well, God, they had Kareem Hunt. He's really good. He can do all these things. Well, they already told you what their choice was when they cut Kareem Hunt and kept Jerome Ford. They told you that back in July, right? So what they'd like to have happen, and you can use that as part of what informs you going forward. And I think we're seeing that more as the season goes on. Like, Kareem Hunt's still going to be there. He's still going to have a role. Pierre Strong too. But Jerome Ford is the guy that they hung their hat on heading into the season as the piece that, hey, if something happens, he's it. And like, whatever my complaints are about his efficiency, which we've seen at times, he doesn't always run very far when he runs. But he seems to have retaken the lead role there and relegated Hunt to a background role. So pay attention early in the year to what the teams are telling you with the decisions they're making with their rosters and things like that, and kind of use them to inform your decisions going forward.
Yeah, we start out trying our best to ascertain what the team wants to do, and then we listen to what the players are doing. The players are going to have their own influence on how these seasons turn out, because they make the team change their plans. And we recalled out, we talked about Jerome Ford. They wanted him to take it. It was possible that he could have fallen flat on his face. He got hurt. He got hurt in camp. He got hurt during the season. He got hurt and didn't even miss a game when he hurt his ankle. But he's looked great. And even with whoever's starting a quarterback for Cleveland, he had a great game the first time out against the Steelers. And you're right. I mean, if anything, you're right that the Kareem Hunt signing was disappointing if you have Ford, because it kept him from being a league winner.
It's a limiting factor. It's more a limiting factor than something. But also, the way the league works, it creates more pieces that we can use in lineups.
Sure.
If we identify the right guys at the right time. But that's where the trickiness comes in for fantasy managers, and it's no more no more problem anywhere than it is at running back, where we're seeing even players like Tyjae Spears. Whether you can't play Tyjae Spears, and you still want to play Derrick Henry, but you can't deny that Tyjae Spears is a limiting factor for Derrick Henry.
Right. He's on the field more than him. It's running back, right? We keep circulating around running back, but and what's fun about this is you can attack it from a lot of different angles. You mentioned volume, Javonte Williams, or we talk about big plays and quality of offense, Keaton Mitchell or Jerick McKinnon, and so on. So there's a lot of different ways to get there, but you want to at least be on the lookout. So if you start to see the first chapter of that story being written, you can get in before everybody else who I want to see more evidence by that time it's too late. But we've talked about, well, the coaches want it to be a certain way. They're going to give a player a chance to make it a certain way.
And then the player has to cash in. Right.
Exactly. The player has to follow through. In some cases, with Devin Achane, you almost got the feeling it was opposite, that they didn't even really want to use Devin Achane, and he forced them to, right? I'll go one more. And this is really where I am going to tell a story, because I'm a Steelers fan. And Bob, I'm not resisting. I'm not resisting anymore. Because, Kenny Pickett, Matt Canada. Oh, gosh. It's so, a touchdown drive is like birthing a baby. It's just so hard to watch. And we've been watching it, whether it was old Ben Roethlisberger or Duck Hodges or Mason Rudolph. And a defense that is still at the heart of a champion kind of defense, But I'm embracing it and just, hey, this is Steelers football, and they're finding ways to win. And maybe, just maybe, the guy that's going to save your season is Jaylen Warren. And Jaylen Warren is a player that absolutely has forced the coaches to change. And we've seen how explosive he is in limited doses. Now, again, there's the counterexample about Tony Pollard or whoever. Although Jaylen Warren's a big back. He's an explosive back, but he's not necessarily a back that you look at and you say, well, he could get wore down if you give him more work. And you have Mike Tomlin, who is telling us, I thought it was really interesting. I mentioned this again. Mike Golick was talking about Mike Tomlin and how he stays on message, that Mike Tomlin figures out a way that no matter what he's asked, he's going to find a way to turn that question into a way to deliver a message he wants to deliver. He's very consistent. And when they asked about the workload, the 50-50 split between Warren and Harris, and is that going to be the workload? He said, well, that's what it was last week. When you consider that Mike Tomlin is someone that very carefully chooses his words and understands the message he's conveying. Go ahead, Bob.
This is the same Mike Tomlin who last year, when people started talking about, can Jaylen Warren be the feature back, told us this story is being written. And that's the true story. That's the truth of it. He's coming on. Let me just sit here and throw a little support to fellow Harris. Now he's getting a little bit of momentum. It's been fine. So I agree with you. Like, if I had to sit here and invest today, like if you made me decide today which one of those two I'd want, I'd probably lean Warren. But Najee Harris is coming a little further. And so this is another of my more recent theories here. If you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. If you have Najee Harris, you can love him. It's okay. If you have Jaylen Warren, love him. It's the same with Gibbs and Montgomery. Mostert and Achane. There's these split backfields. It's not like you're, like, wow, my guy is not quite as good as the other guy, but he's still a lot better than a lot of other players, and maybe a little more certain role. So, and I think Pittsburgh, both of those guys, like, finally we had Najee, had 2 straight weeks where he outscored Warren. Novelty. But it's in the range of possible outcomes here any given week. And it looks like it looks like he's getting a little better, and it doesn't look like Warren's getting any worse.
Well, what's happening, Bob? What's happening is, and look, and it warms my heart that you threw the Steelers backfield out there with Detroit and Miami, like legit good offenses. Well, we can talk a little more about Miami and add some nuance to that. But with the Steelers, not a good offense. The opposite of a good offense. But Broderick Jones is playing right tackle, first round pick. I think the stat was something like 3.6 yards downfield before contact. I think the best they were was something like 2. And the run, and the same thing happened last year. They started getting better at running the ball by like December. So the offensive. So, and when you think about it, Najee Harris is a running back who needs that more than Warren. But for Warren, it's more of a multiplier. Warren was already starting to find creases and make plays with the offense kind of in the sludge. But if they're starting to crisply open up holes, then you're going to see that momentum. And it's just like I said, I'm embracing this Steelers. It's a Bill Cowher style Steelers team. All right. That's what we're going to have here. We're going to win with defense, running game. Don't make any big mistakes. We impose our will on the opponent, and Jaylen Warren could be that guy. But like you said, Najee Harris, maybe not too shabby. Absolutely, offenses can produce 2, especially this year with how unreliable running back is. Offenses can produce 2 every week starters.
Throughout the Rams, with Kyron Williams. With Kyron Williams out, it's been a 2-man rotation. So, and either of them has been playable. We were probably heading that direction with Minnesota. I don't know if Ty Chandler is going to be a playable piece. Maybe he will be this week, because I don't know Alexander
Right.
Madison will play. But I think we're seeing more of that. I don't, the guys handling a true featured role are a diminishing number of them.
Yeah.
And some of the ones that are this year to me are a little bit surprising, and probably people didn't expect, like Rashad White to be as dominant, and even when he was horrible, they just kept going to him, right? And then they figured out, well, maybe we should throw to him more. And to the group, we were all very grateful for that.
Yeah. With Rashad White, what's funny is you could have had Rashad White right and say, well, sure, he's a decent receiver out of the backfield. He should not be a lead running back. He's going to be inefficient. They're not going to have a good running game to begin with.
He's all those
He's
things.
going to make it worse. That's all true. But nobody else on the roster deserves work. So
and definitely, clearly they didn't, because if somebody was capable of running better, they would have put him in the game, surely. I mean, because it was not good for White early on.
No,
it's still not great. I mean,
still not great,
right, as a runner.
And then old Baker Mayfield. Every time I think about Baker Mayfield, and he's been a surprise. I mean, you could have taken it. Now, Chris Godwin hasn't worked out. Mike Evans sure has. That was a pick where we overreacted to what Baker Mayfield had done to the value of players that Odell Beckham, et cetera, in the past. However, I chalk this one up to, again, stories, right? Baker Mayfield, the number 1 overall pick that analytics made a poor process organization reach for. It's already doing insurance commercials before he's really done anything in the NFL. That story isn't going to produce a good result. Baker Mayfield, the plucky underdog who's going to convince everybody who's given up on him that he still has some decent football left in him. That story can come true. So that's how I see stories like that. Now here's another story. Josh Allen and the Bills are panicking. Bob, they're panicking. You can feel it. You can smell it. Ken Dorsey's fired. Really? Ken Dorsey was the problem? Really? Joe Brady's going to fix this mid-season. He's going to do a Joshua Dobbs on the offense. This team, I'm getting distress signals, but can we turn that into any kind of Morse code for fantasy football advice?
Like when you looked at the game from Monday night, when did they have success? When they started running the football? Maybe they should take some of that to heart and take a little pressure off Josh Allen, who obviously is feeling some pressure because the turnovers are, a big issue, right? He's got two more turnovers. What is it? 14 turnovers, 11 interceptions, 2 more than the next closest. The guys in the same range as him are named Desmond Ridder and Mac Jones. And it's 33 turnovers since Dorsey became the coordinator, and 6 more than the next player, and that's Trevor Lawrence. So, like, it's not a reach to believe that Josh Allen's trying too hard, right? And so hopefully they could dial this in and everyone can relax a little bit. I don't think the position they're in they will, but by relax I mean maybe take a little pressure off Josh Allen. Their defense has not helped, right? The injuries on defense has added to the pressure on Josh Allen. Look, I'm not sitting here apologizing for Josh Allen. I just, I think a little bit of hero ball is, going to be, the more he plays that, the more they're going to have a problem. So, so if they can find a way to, like James Cook responded when they asked him, in a pinch to let's get this done. He came through and got it done, and it made Josh Allen look a little better during the same time he was running the ball better. So I don't know. I want to say Josh Allen, has a lot of history that I can fall back on in terms of his productivity. And I'm not like playing NFL football. I'm playing fantasy football. So, I would like for him not to end so many drives. I would like with turnovers. I would like him to end more drives with scores. I think that's still in him. But, and so he's not a weekly decision for me yet. Like, I'm not sitting here, Josh Dobbs or Josh Allen. I'm not there yet.
CJ Stroud, not yet.
Well, maybe. Maybe
Justin
CJ
Fields.
Stroud. Man, not yet.
Kyler Murray.
Nah, not yet.
Not yet. Well, and I think you're speaking my language, Bob, because I usually don't do this, but I will say I was one of the few people on Josh Allen Island before the draft. I wrote an article, I think you can still find it out there, why Josh Allen's worth top 5 pick.
Yes.
And the argument I made is that a lot of the bad you saw at Wyoming, the completion percentage, the interceptions, pressing, was because he put the entire offense on his shoulders. And he was playing teams like Nebraska when he was at Wyoming. And you could see the traits and you could see his ability to operate right at that edge, the razor's edge, because that's where the NFL is as a quarterback. The Zach Wilson, right? College football can give you a wider berth to operate in, but that's not a simulation of the NFL. What's the simulation of the NFL? In some ways, putting a college quarterbacking an overmatched team is the best way to see how they're going to fit in the NFL. Like overcoming adversity, overcoming like plays getting knocked out of structure, having to improvise, having to make off-platform throws and change your arm angle and things like this, things that Patrick Mahomes does routinely. And I argued that if he was in a better offense, a better environment, that he wouldn't fall back on these bad habits or do these things where he's living right at the edge. And like you said, he's back there again. And the running game is the way Cecil's been calling for this for years, that they have to have a balanced offense.
Yep.
And then psychologically he doesn't feel that. So maybe it is James Cook season savers. Maybe Tavis Murray looked all right. Even Leonard Fournette doing a Jerome Bettis impression for them. Speaking of Bill Cowher's.
Speaking of speculative plays, that look at the last man on your roster, and if he's getting you 1.2 points a game,
right? Right.
Go ahead.
Let's go the opposite of season saving, and you can tell me because you're sage that I'm overreacting. Okay, Miami's offense. Well, what's the story about Miami? Right? They can beat bad teams. They can't beat good teams. They can't beat teams with winning records. Right? That's the story. Right, and the offense also has been like that. Right? I mean, either everything looks good and it's gorgeous, and it's so resplendent with fantasy value, or it can struggle. It can be choppy. So when I look ahead, the second week when I want to bring this up, when I look ahead to Miami playing the Jets, Dallas, and Baltimore in the fantasy playoffs, the Jets, Dallas, and Baltimore, pretty disruptive defenses as defenses go. Is there something actionable there, or is it overreacting to say sell Tyreek high? Or if at the very least, if you have Tua but you don't like your backup quarterback, should you be thinking about upgrading?
I think you should be thinking those things. Those are not unreasonable thoughts, right? Given the way the schedule plays out. Will you get enough to talk you into selling Tyreek Hill? Maybe so. Maybe you have needs in another position. I think that's probably the determining factor for most people who are going to be doing this. Like, wow, I have a huge need. What is the piece I can sell? And here's the thing about all this. Like, players rise up who we didn't expect to rise up. Some of them are giving you solid weekly production that allows you to move on from a player that's got that super high upside. And if that's the case, then yeah, I would certainly consider that. I would even say Puka Nacua, would be a player on your roster. Like, he's not Tyreek Hill. He's not going to give you that upside, but he's giving you solid weekly production, or he's capable of giving you solid weekly production. And sometimes that's enough if you have a weakness at another position. Right. And or a hole, and most likely it's going to be at running back. But so, yeah, I'm not against it. I'm not looking to get rid of my Dolphins just yet, because I do think that's an interesting scheme. There are such amazing playmakers that there's still enough there, even in tough matchups, they can get something done. But the evidence, is there that it's not always easy for them.
Yeah. Well, let's give Mike McDaniel a bye,
sort things out.
Well, and what was really neat about Mike McDaniel and the Dolphins offense this year, Bob, was he knows that if you stand still in the NFL, you're getting passed by.
Yes.
So the Dolphins offense we saw this year was not the Dolphins offense we saw last year. They didn't wait to see if defense caught up. They were doing more looks with sometimes Waddle and Hill not on the field at the same time, where that was really where they were getting most of their work done last year. And Waddle hasn't been healthy all year, by the way.
Right.
That's the other thing. So, hopefully Waddle feels a little better coming out of the bye.
Remember, Craycraft's back too. I mean, I think that's the key. No,
right. Yeah, well, hey, but then when it was Denver, all men needed to get on the Craycraft and go out to sea and harvest the touchdowns. So, we'll see. And I think the Vegas game this week isn't necessarily, they should boat.
Right.
You hope they would boat race Vegas. I mean, Vegas' defense, even with the Antonio Pierce happy story, you would think with 2 weeks and everybody rested, and that's
emotion
your indicator.
Kind of settling in a little bit.
Yeah,
people getting comfortable with their spots. Yeah, and so I would agree with that. But that is time of the season. Start looking at your schedule. Start plotting some strategies, making sure you shored up some weaknesses and thinned out your onesie positions after buys and things like that, and build stronger depth at the positions where you're going to need it more or more likely to need it. And so I'm not against it.
No, it's good. I mean, hopefully, if you're really taking it seriously, it's week 11 and you're listening to a fantasy football podcast or hanging out with us live, then take it for a second, do the simulation like you're the GM. If in a redraft league, either you need to make some desperate push, with those, when you're down 24 points in the fourth quarter, you don't stop trying. It can happen. It's not impossible. 28-3. I'm here in New Orleans. They're always going to tell you that. So you try to do your Hail Mary in a redraft. If you're doing well, you make sure you evaluate your roster, how durable it is for potential catastrophe. In Dynasty, you should either be selling off assets or you should be acquiring assets. Right. Or, I mean, at the trade deadline, it's fun. I mean, this is why we want to play GM. We like this. Okay, I want to ask you one quick thought experiment question before we go off the rails, talking about stories and things like that. I'll just throw it up and say this. If Carolina had drafted CJ Stroud number 1 and Bryce Young had been the number 2 pick to Houston, how different would we be talking about those players right now?
It seems like the Texans have cobbled together better pieces around CJ Stroud than the Panthers have around Bryce Young. That said, the thing that sticks in my mind, and I'm not a draftnik, and I know all so I take the word of people who are, and all the positives on Bryce Young centered around his processing ability and being a cool character, and look, he played at the highest level and had great success, but oversimplifying, I go back to a picture I saw in training camp of him standing alongside his offensive line. He looked like a child, right? CJ Stroud looks like a ginormous man out there playing with other ginormous men, and Bryce Young doesn't. And I mean, I think that's probably an oversimplification. But I feel like CJ Stroud, some of his complaints about how maybe people were undermining him heading into the draft process so that he might last longer than teams could get him, putting out some test scores that maybe didn't shine favorably on him in an effort to turn people off of him. Maybe some of that is correct. I always thought, again, not a drafting, but he looked more like the prototypical quarterback to me than some of the other ones. I was all in on Anthony Richardson just because one of these things is not like the other, and he was like the amazing piece, and he still may be. I mean, all my dynasty shares hope so, but I think I think Stroud was maybe not given the credit he was due.
And some je ne sais quoi, something that he has in him that the players are reacting to. I mean, you cannot exaggerate how calm he seems out there. He's playing in the eye of the storm. And his teammates are reacting to that. And it's not just about, I think, what happens in between the sidelines during the game. I'd imagine that's how he composes himself. Teams take on the personality of the quarterback. And what's worried me about Bryce Young, the moment that made me go, oh, because like you said, there's the picture. But during the season when they had Andy Dalton do the quarterback sneak.
Yep.
And it's not necessarily about, is Bryce Young too small? Or is Bryce Young so lithe that he would just get snapped into on a quarterback sneak? It's not about that to me. It's about that as an organization, they took a player number 1 that they feel that way about. And as soon as we saw the offense, it was a meek, feeble offense. It was an offense that was trying to make sure he wasn't hung out to dry, not asking him to do too much. Whereas CJ Stroud and Bobby Slowick, what they're doing there, he's right at that, talk about Josh Allen, right at that edge of his ability. And he's showing that he can push that edge further and further. Bryce Young is playing in a box. They're playing scared.
They are.
And now, was it necessarily going to be like that? Like, would they have been scared with CJ Stroud too?
Yes.
Would Bryce
They would
Young...
have been, because here's the reason why they play scared in Carolina. 2 words: David Tepper.
Yeah, well, that's more firings until they improve it. That's the thing. Ownership
the beatings
matters.
will continue daily until morale improves.
Right. You got it. You nailed it. Okay. So I did this. In my mind, I messed this up. So I want to make sure I do this right, because we have a precious thing here. This is in honor of Bob Harris, because before we had box turtles, Bob Harris had box turtles, and we shared and we talked about the joy of the baby turtle. There it is, folks. The baby
There's
turtle.
nothing better than baby turtles.
Oh,
Look at how
they're
tiny he
really,
is. The tiny dinosaur in Sigmund Bloom's hand.
and they're so beautiful on the shells. I mean, they're really
Let him
like,
bite your finger and hang on there like he's
right,
drawing
yeah.
blood. Little savage. The little
Right, that could be
savage.
part. I mean, it's what an amazing little creature, and they really just, as we've talked about, Bob. It's so easy is to have like a male and a female box turtle, and give them space, give them an environment,
And you will soon have more turtles.
and soon they will start coming up out of the ground, little miniature dinosaurs. I love it,
And
Bob.
they're super exciting when you finally like go, oh, this is another one. This one's smaller than the last one I found, or this one's a little bigger. And like they just come out of nowhere. It's amazing.
And when every time we find one, like when I've been the one who's gotten to like come out and see a new one, I I yell, like I'm like, there's a have to be another one. Like the whole neighborhood could hear me because I'm just so overjoyed. But we're not going to talk about turtles because what I want to talk about. This was great. You gave me this during the show today because we talked a lot about turtles. We'll come back to turtles. That's just an honor of the box turtles, folks. They're wonderful.
Great.
You went down a little mind wormhole to your high school football days earlier, Bob. So I want to drill down, if you're willing. I want to know more about Bob Harris, high school football player. But really, where I want you to start is, how was it different back then? I mean, gosh, high school football culture. Some of it has changed, and some of it hasn't. So when you reflect and you think about like the high school football that you took part in and what you see going on out there now, what pops into your head?
So interesting, kind of, I was at a school that had the longest losing streak in the top division in Arizona for a number of years, right? And so as I came in as, a freshman, I played on the freshman team. We were pretty good. Played on this, in the JV team as a sophomore. We were pretty good. Got promoted up to varsity for a few games. They were horrible, right? But when I moved up in my junior year, they hired a new coach, and like a legendary coach in Arizona named Ollie Mayfield. and we were going to take the world by storm, take the world by surprise. And we did. And it was like same players for the most part, right? Same kind of player, but just a different coach, right? And I think back then, what I realized is how one person can change the life trajectories of many, many people. Now, I will acknowledge right here and now, Ollie Mayfield and I did not see everything eye to eye. We did not necessarily get along 100%. And I will also say every single day, something I learned from that man applies to my life, right? I can find moments in my life where something he taught me or something he said or something he instilled in me clicks and hits. And I think, and if I stopped and thought about it more, there would be way more. Right. I just don't think about it. And some of the little sayings that he had and all those things. So I think as I look back on it, that's the thing that jumps in my mind, how one person, and it's not just me, it's every player on that team, every player he came across. And it's not just the team I was on. It was the years before. He was a legendary coach. He's a Hall of Fame coach in Arizona. And he did the same thing at a school prior to coming to my school. And so there are just people out there who can touch young people in ways and he was an old man, right? I'm a crusty old man. And like I said, I did not know we clashed, right? We were not like the get along guys, but still totally respected him, totally respect where he took us. So I don't, I don't want to get this into a then and now thing, but I don't think the things that flew then and the things that were okay then are certainly not going to be okay now. Just like my dad chasing me up the street with his belt when I was 6 years old in 1967. And the neighbors all stood outside nodding like, that's how you do it, right? I mean, you don't do that anymore, right? Times change, right? So times have changed now. And I don't know, I think we see it at all levels. Look at how the college football game has changed. And like the way things work now, it just seems foreign to me, but it's working perfectly fine. And it's leading people to great success, and people are achieving at levels I hadn't imagined before. So I think just the changing times and the changing attitudes that you see, just the normal evolution that humans go through and the way we view things, it's totally changed. I would probably not trade in that period for anything. It was like truly a formative thing and just like set me up on trajectories in life that it's been a winding path, right? And but still, there are touchstones within that take me back to that era and the things I learned, about not giving up and fighting on, and just how you handle yourself, different things like that. So that was it. And I played against some really cool dudes too. Skip Pete was one of them. The one that really stands out is a linebacker who played for the San Francisco 49ers. When I played against him, his name was Ricky Gray. You would know him as Ricky Ellison, now a rocket scientist, by the way. Played at Stanford, but the first time when I was very young, I think I'd been promoted up from as a sophomore to the varsity for one game. And I went against him. I was an offensive guard. He was a linebacker. And it was like the first time I ever hit like somebody that was like different, right? I played football, started playing football when I was 8 years old. And like, I was pretty good, right? Like great techniques and all these things. This was like a life altering moment running into that Ricky Gray kid, soon to be Ricky Ellison. So there's just so many memories of back then. It's such a good time. And like football to me is a great thing, building the camaraderie. I mean, friendships that started in those locker rooms and on those football fields exist to this day. And, it's just like you start talking to someone who you have that shared experience with. It's like we were never apart, right? I can sit down and start talking to someone who we were together then, not even talking about then, just talking about things in general. And it's like we've never been apart.
Yeah, it's that team, the family, and football. I went first. Ollie Mayfield. I pulled it up while you were talking about the Pima County Sports Hall of Fame, but he's a member of more than one Hall of Fame.
Yeah, he is.
Arizona Athletic Hall of Fame. And he was the coach of the decade in the 70s, coach of the year 4 times, the Bell and Howell Master Coaching Award 1973, Arizona's 3rd winningest high school football coach ever with a 103-35-1 record. He went in 10 years at Tucson High. He was 81, 23-1, and back-to-back state titles 1970. One of the all-time best, his 1970 team went 12-0 and beat Sunny Slope 54-16 in the championship game. And all 3 running backs ran for 1,000 yards that year. Ollie Mayfield. And like you said, it just is the effect. He's a father figure. He's a
right.
It's you say that, and I think of my dad, my late father, Sigmund Bloom, and how even when he and I were estranged, he was with me, and I would hear his voice, and I would hear him. I didn't even grow up with him, but the time that I spent with him growing up, like it stayed with me, and it helped guide me through life. Right? That's what parenting is. And football, and we can talk about football, professional football exists, and really high school football, the high school football industrial complex, like all the football industrial complexes, because there's so much money around football now. I'm going to be charitable when I say it's in a moral gray area. Okay. But there's something about football, the game, and then like you say, the camaraderie. And there's that book Across the River about Edna Carr here in New Orleans. It's amazing about the bonding. And then on the field, you find yourself, or you become, really in a mythical kind of transformative manifestation kind of way. Like it changes you as a person, like you say, Bob. You can, and really, really quick, you were a defensive line. It sounds like you were a defensive line.
I was both lines.
Okay, line.
Offensive line. I I started out in the trenches and then went to college, and they turned me. I was little, or not little, but not as big, and so they turned me into a fullback. So.
That's perfect. Of course, Bob Harris would be the fullback on your team of everybody in the fantasy football world trying to help you win, or otherwise enjoy your days more. You certainly help us enjoy our days more. We have the pleasure. I want to make that one word, pleasure, privilege and pleasure of serving y'all. It's so great to get to do this as our bargain here with life. As always, you're the best audience to serve because you're so classy.